I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. This week we are looking at the disappearance of 55-year-old Barbara Bolick from the Bear Creek Overlook in the Bitterroot Mountains. According to All Trails, the Bear Creek Overlook is 4.5 miles out and back near Victor, Montana. Generally considered a moderately challenging route, it takes an average of 2 hours and 30 minutes to complete. This is a popular trail for birding, hiking, and running, but you can still enjoy some solitude during quieter times of the day. The best times to visit this trail are March through October. Dogs are welcome, but must be on a leash. Most of the reviews mentioned there was an incline on the way up that wasn't too bad, but was totally worth the views at the top. A lot of people referred to this as an easy day hike. As far as info on the Bitterroot Mountains, the Bitterroot Mountains are a large mountain range that extend from Wallace, Idaho, southeast to Salmon, Idaho. The mountain range is approximately 165 miles long and 75 miles wide, and generally runs along the Montana-Idaho border. The Bitterroot Valley borders the eastern boundary of the mountain range for its entire length. According to Wikipedia, the Bitterroot Mountains encompass 4,862 square miles. As far as Barbara's history, she met her husband Carl Bolick in New Jersey while he was still in the Air Force. He went on to work for J.P. Morgan Chase Bank in New York City. After they retired, they moved to Corvallis, Montana in 2001. Carl was a Montana native, but Barbara had never lived there. However, Barbara, who was an avid hiker, soon grew to love her new home and frequently went on long hikes in the nearby Bitterroot Valley. "This is the place that I want to be," she told her husband. Barbara was an experienced hiker, and she ran daily. She was cautious while hiking and always brought along a backpack that contained food, water, and a .357 Magnum revolver for protection. Her husband said, "I always used to kid about packing that gun away. If she met up with a mountain lion or a bear, she wasn't going to have time to dig around and find that pistol. She was only about 5 feet tall and slight in build. She only weighed about 115 pounds. Still, Carl was sure his wife could take care of herself. Her fear of heights also made her actively avoid getting too close to any cliffs she encountered during these walks. During her time in Montana, from 2001 to 2007, Barbara had been taking pilot lessons and was eager to get her license. She was also learning how to ski. According to Carl, his wife was very happy with their life together and had no real complaints. Then, in July 2007, Carl's cousin Donna Biles came to Montana for a visit, along with her boyfriend, 58-year-old Jim Ramaker. Barbara always enjoyed taking guests with her on hikes to show them the scenery, especially since Carl was no longer able to join her on hikes after suffering a heart attack. The plan for July 18, 2007 was for Barbara, Donna, and Jim to hike Barbara's favorite trail, the Bear Creek Overlook, located near Victor, Montana. It was about a 15-minute drive from the Bolick home. But when Donna woke up on the morning of July 18th, she was hungover from the drinks they'd had the night before and decided it wouldn't be a good idea for her to go hiking. Barbara and Jim still wanted to go, so at around 8:30 or 9 a.m., Barbara woke Carl up and told him that she was going to take Jim to the Overlook and that they'd be back later. Carl assured her that he'd take care of making dinner. Carl Bolick spent the morning working on a carpentry project. Around noon, Donna was starting to feel a little anxious about the fact that Barbara and Jim hadn't returned. Carl, on the other hand, knew that his wife was an experienced hiker and extremely familiar with the trail they were planning to hike that day, so he reassured his cousin that there was nothing to worry about and that they'd likely be back at any moment. Yet when there was still no sign of them an hour later, Donna began to panic and suggested that Carl call somebody. That's about the time the phone rang, around 2 p.m. It was a Forest Service law enforcement officer. He told Carl that Jim had reported Barbara missing. Carl immediately drove to the site, hoping that his wife would have been located by the time he got there. But that wasn't the case. According to Jim Ramaker, he and Barbara hiked the full length of the Bear Creek Overlook and then stopped to have a bite to eat. They came across two young men hiking around this time, and the group talked for roughly half an hour while admiring the scenery. It is unknown exactly when the men left or how far ahead of Jim and Barbara they might have been, but Jim stated that he and Barbara started to head back at around 11:30 a.m. At some point, Jim stopped to look around, wanting to take in the view one more time. He said that he did this for no more than 45 seconds before turning back and finding that Barbara, who had been only 20 to 30 feet ahead of him, was no longer there. Accounts vary as to exactly when this occurred, placing her disappearance at any time between 11:30 a.m. and 1 p.m., a fairly large window of time. Jim searched the immediate area for Barbara while calling out to her. According to Jim, it was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. Jim made his way back to the trailhead and found construction workers there. The road leading to the trailhead was closed for maintenance that day. It's unclear exactly when the workers arrived, but when Jim came across them, he asked if they'd seen Barbara and gave a short description of her. They hadn't seen her, but did remember seeing two young men with a black and white dog exit the trail earlier. As far as the accounts from the road crew, they said that on the morning of July 18th, the road leading up to the trailhead was blocked, less than a mile down the hill, so a Forest Service crew could replace a culvert. By the time the crew arrived that day, there was already a pair of vehicles parked at the road closure sign. Jim Ramaker's vehicle and a light-colored, older SUV that could have been a Chevy Blazer with Missoula County license plates. The Forest Service crew was busy digging up the roadway when a pair of young men in their early 20s came strolling into the work site. One of the men was considerably darker skinned than the other. They were well-tanned, average, fit young guys, Perry Johnson said. They walked right through the construction site. They stopped and talked for a bit. The crew remembered the black collie-like dog with white markings that enjoyed a few moments in the creek. The morning was already turning hot. The men walked off, seemingly without a care. Somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour later, Jim Ramaker walked into the site and asked the crew if they'd seen Barbara. One of the road crew walked with him back to the vehicle to see if she was there. Jim Ramaker walked back up to the overlook one more time. When he returned about an hour and a half later, he told the crew he needed help. He couldn't find Barbara anywhere. Jim Ramaker told investigators later that he and Barbara stopped at the overlook and had a snack. They'd seen the two young men and said something like, "How are you doing?" The pair then enjoyed the mountain views for maybe a half hour or 40 minutes before deciding to head back down the hill. Jim Ramaker said Barbara was only about 20 or 30 feet away when he turned to take one more look at the scenery. It was a short look, maybe 45 seconds, maybe a minute. When he turned around, Barbara was gone. It was the last time he saw her, he'd tell investigators later. The search for Barbara Bolick began. Carl remained at the Bear Creek Overlook until midnight, desperate to find his wife. He was encouraged to go home and rest, which he finally did. The following day, he came back with a group of friends and neighbors who wanted to help him look for her. In the coming days, several ground search and rescue teams, accompanied by search dogs, were organized to look for Barbara Bolick. Aircraft using infrared and thermal imaging were utilized as well. Nothing was found. Not only was Barbara missing, but they could find no evidence that she was even on the trail that day. The dogs were unable to pick up her scent anywhere. After 2 weeks of intensive searching and investigation, Ravalli County Sheriff Chris Hoffman said Barbara Bolick's disappearance was a mystery. "We are perplexed," Hoffman told the Bitterroot Star. "We have combed the area in the vicinity of the disappearance very well. No trace at all has been found. We would like to verify, if we can, that Bolick was even on the mountain that day." Jim told the police about the 2 men they'd encountered on the trail, and law enforcement attempted to locate them, unsure if these were locals or vacationers, and the Bolick family offered a $10,000 reward to try to locate them. The men were in their early 20s, accompanied by a black mixed-breed dog with floppy ears and white markings. My guess is a border collie of some kind. One was described as dark-skinned with black hair, and the other had a medium complexion and reddish hair. Both men were clean-cut, and they each had an athletic build. They may have driven a light-colored, older Chevy S10 SUV with Missoula County, Montana license plates. No one believed these men had anything to do with Barbara's disappearance, but they could offer insight into the case. Like, was Barbara actually there on the trail? To this day, those men have never been found or identified. While it might appear quite odd or possibly even suspicious that they never came forward, it's also important to note that Barbara's case never received a great deal of media attention, and it's possible that they were, and still are, unaware that she is missing, especially if they didn't live in the area. Other witnesses, including the construction crew, confirmed the men were on the trail. Many have found it odd that Jim heard nothing strange the day that Barbara went missing. There's a lot of loose shale rock around the Bear Creek Overlook Trail, making it difficult, if not impossible, to move about quietly. Lead investigator Perry Johnson stated, "This is really a tough one for me. It's outside of my scope of experience. I haven't been able to find anyone else who's had a similar experience. We're talking about a minute, and then you look back and she's gone." The area isn't tightly timbered, and there is a lot of loose shale rock around it. It's hard to creep quietly across loose shale rock. You'd make some noise. Just the fact that someone simply disappears like that is a cause for concern. If Barbara had ventured from the trail or fallen over the cliff edge, it seems odd that Jim heard nothing. It has also been suggested that Barbara might have fallen suddenly and not had time to call out. However, her fear of heights made her especially careful around them. This was her favorite trail, and she was very familiar with it, so an accidental stumble seemed unlikely. There was no evidence of a bear or mountain lion attack. If a wild animal had attacked Barbara, there would have been some drag marks, blood, or tissue in that area. Jim would have heard screaming or sounds of a struggle. It's possible that she slipped unexpectedly and was trapped in a crevice or cave, though it's odd that the extensive search was unable to find any trace of her or her hiking gear. As often happens in missing and lost persons cases, the police initially wondered whether Barbara had decided to leave her life behind and start over somewhere else. As with the other theories, there was nothing to support this either. In addition to the fact that she appeared to be very content with her life, she also left behind her wallet, ID, passport, and other valuables, as well as her beloved dog and cat. Also, she and Carl had planned an upcoming fall trip to the Mexican Riviera, for which they were both very excited. Others have theorized that this could be a case of foul play. Was Barbara abducted and murdered in a random attack and then removed from the scene with no trace? Could Jim have murdered her and hidden her body well enough in an area with which he was unfamiliar that she'd never be found? That seems rather unlikely. Jim was a trusted family acquaintance, but perhaps he made sexual advances on Barbara on or before the hike. There was a struggle and he killed her. Since no scent was found, maybe something happened before they arrived at the Bitterroot Valley. However, it's unclear what Jim's motives would have been to murder Barbara, especially as they hardly knew each other and he was in a happy relationship with Donna. Perhaps the hiking disappearance was a cover-up for Barbara's previous death and the group colluded together. If so, why would Jim use such a cover story that involved the authorities? Jim Ramaker cooperated with law enforcement from the beginning and offered to take a polygraph test before returning to his home in California. But this was never done. He was quickly cleared of any involvement in the disappearance. During an interview with the Missoula Independent, Ramaker said he was frustrated about the lack of closure in the case. He reiterated what he told law enforcement. "I never laid a hand on Barbara. I never harmed her in any way, and furthermore said, I've had a cloud over my head since 2007. The police received many dubious tips over the investigation, including one that said Barbara was abducted by a ghostly mountain man. Another possibility in this scenario, one that could explain why the search dogs found no trace of Barbara's scent, is that something occurred before they ever arrived at the trail that day. They took Jim's rental car to the Bitterroot Valley, but did Barbara even make it there? Carl Bolick was devastated by the mysterious disappearance of Barbara. He found it difficult to eat or sleep for weeks and ended up losing 35 pounds over the course of that summer. Years later, he described his thoughts. "I just couldn't accept it. I just knew she was going to show up one way or the other, but it didn't happen. It still hasn't happened. I don't have the answers. I wish I did. There's just nothing. That's what's so perplexing." The loss of his wife also made him overthink his actions during their marriage, wondering if he had taken her for granted. Donna suggested to other family members that Barbara could have committed suicide, but on hearing the rumors, Carl refused to speak to either Donna or Jim. It caused a huge family rift. While Jim Ramaker remained cooperative with law enforcement, he and Donna soon drifted away from Carl. Sadly, Carl Bolick passed away in 2021 at the age of 80. Investigator Johnson later reflected on the strangeness of the disappearance. This whole case challenges our life experience. Whenever we go hiking, we expect that we'll return to our vehicle with our hiking partners. We think nothing about it. That's just the way it is. To this day, not a shred of evidence has ever been discovered regarding Barbara Bolick's disappearance. The truth of what happened to her, the woman who seemingly vanished without a trace on that long ago July day, remains a mystery. My personal opinion on this particular case is that perhaps she wasn't on the trail in the first place. Currently, there's no one available who can say they saw her. Then again, why would Jim offer the info about he and Barbara speaking to the two men who were clearly on the trail? He wouldn't have any idea that they wouldn't be able to be found to corroborate his story of her being there. So, basically, I've just talked myself out of that idea. She had to have been there. Why would you do that? Why would you tell the police that, yeah, we talked to these two guys, she was there, everything was great, the two guys were definitely on the trail. Jim wouldn't even have a clue that the police would never be able to find these two men. So he didn't make up the two men. She had to have been on the trail. I don't know. You all have to let me know your thoughts. Such a confusing story. That's going to do it for this week's episode. And just a heads up that there is not going to be a new episode this coming Friday, as I will be traveling in the coming week. If I can find a good spooky location, I may do another live investigation on our Facebook page, so make sure you like us so that you can be able to check that out. You can find our social media links on the website at lurkpodcast.com. You can also find all of our episodes there. Or you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you like what you hear, tell your friends, give us a 5-star review, tell your enemies, shout it from your rooftop, send up smoke signals, hire one of those airplanes that pulls the sign behind it at the beach. If you did that, you would be my favorite person in the world. And until next time, keep lurking.